Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. Make sure you like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So we have some new intel out of the Michigan gubernatorial race. Gretchen Whitmer in a new poll is losing to a quote-unquote generic Republican by 11 points. And this is not the only poll that actually shows this. Now, we can read a little bit in the article where it shows that it seems as if Whitmer has only a 41.1% approval, 54% disapprove. And this comes right after Whitmer was caught essentially breaking her own restrictions, flying down to Florida during spring break when she said others shouldn't, and also dining at an East Lansing bar, breaking the restrictions that they had. But beyond that point, it shows that just 9.6% said they were more likely to vote for her after her hypocritical action. I don't know why that's above zero, honestly, unless you are either misunderstanding the question or just a pure psychopathic individual who just loves, double standards and control. I don't know why you would say you'd be more likely to vote for Gretchen Whitmer after that action. Again, similar thing with the secret trip to Florida beyond that point. And Signal is probably, again, do I believe that Whitmer's going to lose by 11? No. And people are going to sit here and say, well, you like to discount the polls when, they have Republicans down. And it's typically because polls typically have been off in one direction only for the past 5 to 10 years or so, to the point where we need to analyze these polls that are the outliers, because the outlier polls typically have been the correct ones, especially in places like the Rust Belt, in Michigan, and especially in, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania as well, where the polls typically have overestimated the Democratic candidates time and time again. But it does seem as if Signal, it's a poll that's been accurate in the past. It was a right-leaning poll. The fact that Whitmer only has 41% support, I disagree with that. I think that she would probably, if she would lose, it would be a very, very close race, because she does have a lot of the suburban, Karen types in Oakland County. A lot of them do back her significantly. To the point where it really would have to come down to turnout. But again, you have a lot of angry rural Republicans across the state of Michigan, working class voters, blue collar voters that are really fed up with the lockdowns and everything, that would essentially turn out in high numbers against Whitmer. Now, it is true that by 2022 in the midterms, the lockdowns are not going to be the number one issue, but trust me, people are not going to forget about it. And Whitmer is not necessarily going to maintain the same level of popularity that she did during the 2020 election cycle, which I think even was overstated in the polls significantly. But beyond that, this is not the only poll. And we could look at this because there's another poll. And yes, it is a Republican internal poll. James Craig, who is the former police chief of Detroit, he is a very solid candidate. I like him a lot. I think he would stand the best chance. John James, could he run? I like John James, but do you really want to run somebody who would risk losing 3 statewide elections in a row? That would be embarrassing. This guy would not be able to, go outside in Republican areas. He'd be the Martha McSally +1 of the state of Michigan. And I like John James, but I think a better James is in the race. James Craig, who I believe would be a solid candidate going up against Whitmer. And there's another poll out of Competitive Edge Research and Communication. Again, right-leaning poll, should be taken with a grain of salt. And it has James Craig up over Whitmer by 7 points. Now, this is very interesting when you look at it, because you can clearly see that the poll also has John James trailing Whitmer by 5. Now, the thing about this is this very well could just be a Republican internal poll that they're putting out there that makes Craig look good, but James look bad, because they don't want James to run, essentially. And honestly, I don't believe John James is going to run. I think he'd be, better off running for Congress. There's some potentially competitive seats that are going to be winnable in the Detroit metro area. John James, I believe, will live in one of those districts potentially. I think he would be a good candidate to run for Congress. But I think James Craig would be the best bet the Republicans can do. I'd like to see a policy platform from him, obviously, but it does seem as if he is beating Whitmer by a solid margin, 7%. In this poll, and 11% from a generic Republican in another poll. Yeah, they're both Republican internal polls, then they should be taken with a grain of salt. I don't think Craig's going to win by 7, and there are a lot of undecided voters in this poll, and there were some undecided voters in the last poll. But either way, what it shows is that there are multiple polls that are backing up the fact that Whitmer is vulnerable. Yes, they are right-leaning, but typically when you talk about internal polls, you add 5 points to the side that is not conducting the poll. Even so, Craig would be winning in both polls, and in one of the polls, he'd be winning by 6. So honestly, and another thing about Republican internal polls is the fact that they were some of the most accurate polls in 2016, 2018, 2020, believe it or not. Now, in some places they weren't, like Georgia, but in Michigan, you could look at the Senate election here in the polls. John James, they said, haha, you say it's a toss-up, we're going to make fun of you. And, well, it was a toss-up because the threshold for a toss-up is under 2%, and it was. But you look at the polls, I mean, Mitchell Research, the Republican poll, Terrence Group, the Republican poll, all these polls actually overestimated Gary Peters. Every single one. I mean, there was a Mitchell poll that, slightly overestimated James and Trafalgar in early October, but it definitely, the national environment changes going up to the election. Typically, the later polls are supposed to be the most accurate polls, and instead, they overestimated Gary Peters or were roughly in line with reality. And there were a lot of other polls before October, like Marketing Resource Group, that overestimated Gary Peters as well. Terrence Group had Peters winning. That margin was pretty much right on the mark in terms of Peters +1 or so. But you could look at this and you could see the Republican internal polls. I mean, the hyper-partisan poll had Peters up by 11. So they're not always these inaccurate polls that massively overestimate the Republicans, because that's not how it works. Now, I don't believe that Gretchen Whitmer is going to lose by 11 or 7 points. I wish that she would, but I really think it's going to be, within a couple of points either way. I did my gubernatorial prediction yesterday on this channel. I probably would have filled it in tilt R and taken some backlash from the election mafia in the process, but I don't really care about them. If I saw these polls, it would have been tilt R, because I think Craig, if he gets the nomination, it would be easy. It would be an easy victory for him. The Republican primary, you could see this right here. Announcement is pending. You have a lot of, I guess you would say, internet candidates running. I don't believe that any of these guys are really going to stand a chance. I'm sure some of them are very nice people. Some may be watching this video right now. No disrespect. But James Craig is probably the front runner. Steven Crowder, I mean, the guy lives in Texas, okay? He lived in Michigan for so long, then he moves to Texas. It would be the equivalent of me, a few months from now running for local office in Michigan, even though I live in the state of Texas. It's kind of like reverse carpetbagging in a way, and I don't think that's going to play out too well. Of the other candidates, I really don't think a whole lot of these people are going to run. Chatfield, James Colbeck. I like Colbeck, but I don't know if he's going to run. I think James Craig is going to be the front runner easily in the state of Michigan. And in terms of the map, how are Republicans going to win this? And we could look at this because Michigan, again, pretty close state. But you have to understand Trump was uniquely underperforming in places like Ottawa and Kent County. I do believe that James Craig would easily take Kent County the way John James did. I think he'd get the James margins in the suburban counties. I think he'd get the Trump margins in the rural counties. And I think that it would be an easy victory if the cards are played right, which, again, with the Republican establishment, it's not always done so. But James Craig, I think, is a solid candidate. I don't really consider him a part of the Republican establishment. He was a police chief. I believe he was nonpartisan, actually. But he's a conservative now. But you can look at the election shuffler, and we can play with this if you want to do this. You could, take these counties right here, these traditionally Republican counties where statewide Republicans would do better in, and you could add approximately, we could even add like 8 points, honestly, given the national environment at a minimum. I mean, you shift those counties, and already you see an improvement. I mean, you could talk about Oakland County. I think that the margins there would even be single digits in a midterm year. Already you could see the Dems are the margin shaved down to just 1.11%. And you could talk about a place like maybe Craig would do even a little bit better in a bellwether county like Saginaw. We could talk about maxing out the margins in some of these other places, and you could say, yeah, it could be a victory for him. I mean, we could lower turnout in a place like Washtenaw County as well, where Democrats are getting closer to maxed out in that county. Even Wayne County, I don't think he'd do much better in Detroit just because he was, the police chief, because he's a Republican. But I do believe that the margin could be cut in the county as a whole to like D+35 already, and the Republicans have the lead. Now, I didn't even change the margins in any of the rural counties and made them favor Republicans or like suburban Lansing. I think Livingston County would definitely be a place where Craig would run up the margins better than Trump even. And you could do the math here. We could like even change the rural counties altogether, or these counties down here that have a decent amount of population, like Kalamazoo. But even if you move all the other counties in the state right, just for the national environment's sake, by like 2 to 3%, I mean already you see a massive shift. And I could do this right here. I'm going to fill all these out. Okay, if we make all of these move to the right by an average of, 3.5%, give or take here and there, obviously some of the rural, counties may not turn out as much without Trump on the ticket, but I think, counties like Macomb, maybe you do a little bit better there to offset it. An average of 3.5 points to the right, shift the counties essentially, and that would give Craig a victory of roughly 2%. Now, I do believe he would win Leelanau County, this county. Not the biggest pro-Trump county, voted for John James, however. I think he would do even better. You could even say in like Grand Traverse County. So already roughly a 2-point win. This is what I think it's going to look like in terms of the map here. I think it's going to look very similar to James's map, but I do think Republicans are going to do better in the rural counties to a point where I do think that Craig would be a solid candidate. Republicans are going to probably win the state of Michigan by like 2% or so. Obviously, turnout's going to be down. I didn't account for everything in this map. This is not my prediction, but this is just me showing what I think like a kind of like a realistic Republican victory over Whitmer would look like. She definitely is a tough candidate to beat. Don't underestimate your opposition. I feel like Republicans have done this far too often, but I do believe she is beatable. And I think James Craig is the guy to do it, although the polls are probably a little bit lopsided compared to what's actually going to happen next fall. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Please like this video down below, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. Follow me on social media. The links are all in the description below. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Red Eagle, out.